Hey everyone, and welcome to Logik Talks. My name is Blake Grubbs. I'm the head of marketing at Logik.io, and I'll be hosting Logik Talks to bring you interviews with experts in the quote to cash space, in sales, and in the digital commerce space as well, to hopefully share some of their expertise with you. Really excited to share all of this with you. Hope you enjoy. Great. Well, really excited for this Logik Talks today. We have Chad Borer from ATG, Executive Director there at ATG. Really excited to talk to Chad today. Chad, why don't you start out by just introducing yourself, talk a little bit about your role, your experience, and what you do at ATG.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. I'm excited for this as well. I came over to ATG a little over 2 years ago as part of an acquisition and merger, and I've been working in the IT consulting and implementation space for a little over 15 years now, 8 of which have been focused primarily on the Salesforce platform. At ATG, I'm the head of our CPQ and CLM half of our solution architecture team, and I also am happy to serve as our Logik.io practice lead.
Awesome. That's great. We're really excited to have you as the Logik.io practice lead and excited to have that experience lent to our mutual customers here. So really what we wanted to focus on today, Chad, and what we talked about in our previous conversations is, how do companies actually go from, POC to go live, essentially, when it comes to their CPQ setup? So what I wanted to start with is kind of start broadly. What are some of the more common mistakes or the biggest mistakes that you've seen companies make, in between the time when they're selecting the vendor who they're going with to when they're actually going live? What are kind of those big mistakes that you see, and how do you all at ATG, and how do you in your practice kind of recommend that they address those mistakes?
Gotcha. So I would say the top 2 most avoidable mistakes that come to mind are, first, not being fully prepared. We really need people to fully prepare the client participants and stakeholders for the project, and that includes project goals, timelines, scope, and expected time commitment. There's been a number of times where I've been the one to introduce the project to client resources, and in general, so many projects fall behind just because the core requirements and disagreements between client representatives could have easily been figured out and resolved before the vendor actually starts billing their time. The second item is losing sight of the program's top priorities or not continually having them pushed by top stakeholders. If time and budget are a VP of sales top priorities, for example, but the sales ops organization keeps adding nice to haves in scope, that can pretty quickly derail a project.
Yeah, I'd imagine just organizational alignment, like you said, getting on the same page is a huge piece. Going even a little bit deeper than that. So when it actually comes to the setup of CPQ, and when it comes to actually getting CPQ implemented within an organization, within that process itself, what are some of those most common kind of gotchas or hangups that you see companies going through, and what are the things that someone who's maybe starting a CPQ implementation now or about to go through a CPQ implementation, what are those things that they might not be thinking about, but you think that they should be thinking about now to make sure that they make everything as tight as it can be when they get implemented?
Gotcha. So I think it's pretty easy to point to, making sure the requirements are firm and the design is all signed off on and everybody's on the same page. I think some of the more common gotchas that are not as obvious are really the steps between build and go live. We see a lot of our clients starting those steps too late. So we have clients that necessarily want to own their UAT and training for budgetary reasons, or they have large groups that are just ready to do that, but they really only start preparing for those phases right before those phases begin. It takes time to prepare UAT test cases, to train the testers on the solution. It takes time to prepare training materials, and when you're doing training or testing, you're taking people away from their day jobs in order to learn and test the solution. And what we found is that preparing for these phases should really begin a few weeks before build is even set to end. If you wait too long, then people aren't going to be ready. You're going to spend the first week or two in UAT preparing for UAT, And sometimes UAT is scheduled for 2 weeks. And if you eat up that entire time just preparing, then you've effectively set that project 2 weeks behind. There are fairly straightforward and I'll say easy ways to really prepare for those phases without derailing build. It really just takes someone to really think about what it's going to take care of, or what's going to be needed, and just take care of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that you keep talking about is this whole idea of preparation, right? And make sure that you're getting ahead of the challenges before they arise. And I think that's really important with some of these more complex, in-depth projects like CPQ can more often be. One thing that we hear a lot, just in the market in general, is how can we make sure that we're minimizing and reducing kind of the ongoing maintenance and administration within our CPQ solution, right? Because obviously on the front end, we'll get into kind of that sales experience side here in a second, but for the folks who are actually implementing and going through the setup process, the setup process itself can be lengthy, but then, if you don't do it correctly or not do it in an optimal way, that ongoing administration and setup, at least from what we've seen, can be pretty lengthy. Can you talk about kind of how you advise in your practice, how you advise companies, to make sure that within their setup of CPQ, they're doing it in a way that minimizes that ongoing admin for them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say that it all starts with the packages or tools that you select. There are some solutions that rely entirely on custom code, whereas other packages like CPQ and Logik leverage a more declarative administration, which makes learning and maintaining the platform just generally easier. So that's kind of the foundation. Beyond that, there are a lot of standard development lifecycle practices that you can mandate, such as adding comments to code or descriptions to metadata components. I would also say that keeping your documentation up to date goes a long way. All of those things are very easy to do, but they're also very easy to not do. And what we see is that clients who have a robust change management process and have code reviews and a really strong IT team that keeps themselves in check, that really works well and helps reduce maintenance costs overall. It can make a bug fix take a day rather than a week. There's a lot of benefits to be had from there. I would also say that working with your IT teams to set manageable timeline expectations for changes goes a long way as well. Defects are most commonly introduced, in my opinion, when changes are rushed or there's just not given enough time to really vet out a scenario, or more importantly, what are the impacts that are going to be had after you make your changes. And I'll tell you from firsthand experience, time spent fixing production data that was corrupted by a defect outweighs the time saved by rushing something into production. So when it feels like you're going too quick, and you probably are, and you're probably going to have a net negative in terms of time saved versus the additional work that you've created for yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, just to pivot from kind of the administration side to the sales user experience side, right? Because at the end of the day, these projects aren't successful if the sales team isn't happy with the way that they're actually able to go and produce quotes, right? So what would you say, I guess just to start on that topic, what would you say, or would you say that the sales user experience is the most important part of a CPQ rollout to start? I kind of made that assertion there, but would you agree that that is at the end of the day the most important aspect of what a CPQ rollout entails?
Yeah, I would agree to that. I would just caution that it's not the only thing. As long as you kind of got that in the back of your head, that there are other considerations like ease of maintenance, which I spoke to earlier, how the tool integrates to the overall lead to cash process, and if the tool really meets the organization's goals. Some of our clients want the selling process to be as straightforward as possible, and that ends up being a very nice sales user experience. However, if I've been on clients where there've been a lot of mistakes and quoting was too easy, and mistakes and errors in the quoting process made their way to ordering, they then had to call customers back, change billing things, and it's just a lot of additional effort there. And so for some of our clients, the top priority is only sending triple checked and validated quotes to avoid errors. So I think it's the sales experience, but I think it's also the accuracy of the sales experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure that I think what you said about making sure that the full lead to cash process all the way through is being addressed as part of that sales experience makes a ton of sense. When we chatted earlier, Chad, one of the things that you mentioned is that there are a lot of things that sales teams or that companies want to be able to do within CPQ from a sales experience standpoint, particularly in that configuration stage of the sales experience. That can be pretty difficult sometimes to do, and sometimes maybe not even possible. Can you talk about some of those elements of the experience that companies might want to deliver that they might not be able to, or that are pretty difficult for them today, and kind of how you recommend that they address some of those challenges?
Yeah, this was actually a question that I think your boss, Chris Schutz, answered really nicely. So kind of paraphrasing his words here, but sellers want a selling tool to be as responsible and easy to use as the selling experiences they interact with on their personal lives. I think it's impossible to defend a selling tool that you've built if it runs so slow that when I'm saving a product configuration, by the time it's done, I can go on my phone, order something on Amazon, and then I come back and it's still loading. It's really tough to defend that. When I saw my first Logik demo 6 months ago and how responsive and easy to use it is, I knew that this was something that we would dive into head first, specifically from that level of experience.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And just to double down on that, how do you believe that a solution like Logik in particular can help really deliver on those expectations? Right, you mentioned performance, but something that we've also chatted about a little bit is the whole aspect of, and you alluded to it there, right? Like kind of this guided selling experience that's similar to what consumers experience in their personal lives, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, Logik speed and performance while configuring is, I mean, unbelievable. It's like using a desktop tool like Excel. Beyond that, I do think the guided selling experience has been misnamed in other tools, but I do believe that Logik solves that fairly elegantly. And there are a lot of tools that they just present a number of SKUs that a sales rep needs to select from. And if you're a new sales rep, you can't just always go to the person who's been at the company for 20 years and ask them how to build a quote. At some point, the system can actually help with that process. And I think that's where guided selling comes into play. You know, again, I really like to focus on that new sales rep. We include that as a question on when we're doing on-sites and requirements and design. And I believe that the way that Logik can present questions and dynamically display different questions and really carve a narrative and a path of the selling experience, and then land on what products should be added to a quote, for example, based on those answers, it really takes the product selection method out of the configuration experience.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the things that we like to say is, sell solutions, not SKUs, right? Or sell solutions, not parts, right? So that's really good to hear you talk about it like that. One of the things that I like to ask folks too is, because these are all kind of feature-based, product-based aspects of CPQ and of Logik. What would you say from a business value perspective? What is the business value of having a more high-performance solution that has a more guided experience for sales reps? Like, what is kind of like the business case for that you would say, or that you would recommend to your clients?
Gotcha. I mean, going back to what I was saying before, performance and usability are key. Everybody's used to applications on their phones where everything just works. It works really quickly. It's very intuitive. And so the bar is set really high. And if you have a tool that meets that bar, then you're going to have a happy sales staff and good quoting experiences and a quicker sales cycle. I think if you are working with some legacy applications, you can end up with a slower experience. And I see that slower experience multiplying in terms of the inefficiencies. So if it takes an extra, 10 minutes to modify a quote, okay, doesn't sound like that much time, but how many quotes is a sales rep working in a day? how many times is that sales rep having to modify a quote because the customer changes their mind? And so the effects really start to multiply and grow really quickly. I've also seen people leave companies because the selling tool was difficult to use and it slowed them down and they weren't able to be as productive, and go to competitors where they have a better tool. They can sell faster, they can sell more, and have bigger commissions. And sales team turnover is a real thing. I don't think that it would be attributed only to a selling tool, but why give them additional reasons?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think companies in almost every industry are feeling that today, with people jumping companies, and employees kind of have the power today, especially sales folks, right? Where they can kind of choose the best situation for themselves to be in. Especially for great sales reps, they're going to go and choose the place where they're set up for success, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really strong point. Well, this has been great, Chad. I just have one or two more questions to wrap up with you here. One of them is just around, where would you like to see, and this is a little bit more aspirational question here, but where would you like to see kind of the future of CPQ solutions go, right? There's, dozens, if not hundreds of these, types of quoting solutions on the market today. Obviously, there's a few big players in the space, Salesforce, of course, being one at the forefront. Where would you like to see, the space go as a whole, in this category of software go? What are, based on some of the requests and, aspirations of customers who you're working with on a daily basis? Would love to just kind of understand where you'd love to see that go.
Gotcha. As an implementer, we always want the tools to be as easily configurable as possible, but we also want all of the out-of-the-box functionality to meet as many use cases that our clients require them to. Not every client has the same use cases, but if you build a tool that has enough functionality, you can usually get to around 80% in terms of how many of the customer's requirements can be met with out-of-the-box processes. And that remaining 20% is really where I think we can really grow the CPQ tools in the market. If I had to really nail it to one specific functionality or piece of functionality, I would personally like to see a larger variety of methods and experiences a user can leverage within the tool without the need for custom development to implement and maintain. So a lot of tools in the market right now have a rigid user interface that limits what a user can do. Some of them are very kind of, you're picking SKUs and it doesn't give you a guided selling experience, or there's not a creative set of ways to really collect the information to build a solution on the fly. And just in general, I would like to see the tool sets provide a little bit more options and a little bit more usability for users, again, without necessarily having to develop everything from scratch.
Yeah, that's something common that I think we've heard quite a bit too, is flexibility within the platform without having to do the custom development and customization in order to deliver on that flexibility. So I think that's a really important point. Last question here, Chad, and this has been super valuable. Like I mentioned, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of CPQ solutions out on the market. You're focused in your practice on Salesforce and Logik.io. Can you tell us why you believe, Salesforce CPQ and even the, combination of Salesforce and Logik should be, seriously considered by listeners here who might be looking to invest in CPQ or might be looking to consider a change at some point in the future?
Got it. So we're seeing CPQ solutions be pushed further and further beyond the traditional scope of just configure, price, quote, and into areas like forecasting, margin analysis, commissions, order management, inventory management, you name it. And we're needing to show that information to people during the quoting process. I don't believe it's reasonable to expect one CPQ solution to be plugged into an org and just magically solve everything. But one of the things I really like about Salesforce CPQ and Salesforce and the Logik platform is that you can meet most of the business requirements out of the box with declarative build, but the Salesforce platform itself really gives you a lot of tools and out of the box data structures to be able to meet client specific requirements in a variety of ways. So kind of going back to that 80-20 rule, if the out-of-the-box solution provides solutions for 80% of the client's requirements, but there's no way to finish that other 20%, you can't use that solution. I think the Salesforce platform gives us the tools that we need to really get to that 100% meeting all the client's requirements.
Great. Well, Chad, thank you. Those are all the questions I have for you. I think, like I said, this has been super valuable here and kind of doing a deep dive on this topic. So really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us here.
No, thank you, Blake. This was fun.